Corporation. We are recording this and it will be published online at the end of the meeting. I must say, it's, on behalf of the board, it's a pleasure to be back together physically here in Ebbsfleet. We did do it briefly earlier on, but then we went back to remote, but now we're back in person. We have one of our board members who's busy at something else, who's joining us at the moment on Teams. It's good to be here. I'd also like to welcome a representative of the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, Lindsay Horwich. Lindsay is quite new into the department team. It's a pleasure to have you here, Lindsay. We do not have any members of the public here, though we do answer some questions from the public later on. So can I just start with apologies for absence? Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, we do from Councillor Kite, Councillor Murphy. We are expecting Councillor Burley.
Excellent, thank you. Other than the standing declarations of interest for members of the board, are there any other declarations of interest people want to share with us today?
Just my standard declaration that's recorded in minutes from last time, yes.
And I'm sure that's the same for Neil.
Same for me.
So we'll pop those in the minutes. Then we have the part 1 minutes of the last board meeting on the 20th of January 2022. Those are in front of us. Can I assume that those are a fair and true record of the meeting that took place? Yep. Those are duly agreed. Then we have the action list coming off the back of that, which I believe we are making good progress with that. Is there anything, James, which you'd like to draw our attention to?
Not really. I think most of them are now closed. There's a small number that's still open, but they're timed or they're actually being dealt with.
Right, thank you very much for that. Good work on that. I will be changing the running order with everyone's consent at the board meeting when we get into part 2. We have a paper which is updating the board on North Fleet Harbour in part 2 of the meeting. We have Neil and Daniel, because of their roles on the planning committee, who cannot participate in that. So I think we will take that, move it, that is agenda item 10 to after agenda item 11 before AOB, just so, well, we'll probably do it after AOB, just so they can leave the meeting, they don't need to participate in that and come back. So that's a change in the running order. I think it would be appropriate, just before we start this meeting today, to express our solidarity with the people of Ukraine for the illegal invasion in Ukraine. I'm sure a lot of Ukraine nationals have helped to build the Garden City at this point in time and will do that in the years to come. So perhaps we can maintain solidarity with them as they fight for their democracy and independence. Let us then move on to the first item of today's meeting. That's the Chief Executive Strategic Report. Ian, please.
Thank you, Simon. Before I come to the, I guess, the substantive part of my paper, which is about the school place planning, just a couple of points to note. In terms of our occupation of the building and attendance, we, as we have always done, follow the government guidance and following the sort of further relaxations of the advice. We discussed with staff, and we've now increased the capacity of the number of desks that we're making available on a booking basis on the ground floor up to 20, which is about 2/3 of the total capacity. We are seeing staff returning and on a more frequent basis, which is great. So the numbers are increasing that are coming into the office, and most people are really welcoming that. So that's good news. We'll continue as before to follow the guidance. I will update the team tomorrow as well. When we have our regular team briefing in terms of how we would respond to the changes that will come about or have come about not needing to isolate if you test positive. And we're still going to suggest to staff that do test positive, as with any illness, they shouldn't come into the office. That's going to be our advice to staff to stay away if they do test positive, although they don't have a legal requirement to self-isolate. Just worthy of note at section 2 about the appointment of the new housing minister, Mr. Andrew, and we hope, I'm sure, having written to Dean Simon, that we would install the regular meetings that we had with the previous minister, which were very helpful. So we'll hope that those get back into his schedule. Turning then to the school place planning item, which is a more substantial piece in my paper. I don't want to obviously go through all that. Hopefully that was sort of clear. It follows the conversation that we had last time around some of the media reports that were reporting on allocation process in last March, and the fact that some parents who live in Castle Hill have not been allocated a place for their child at the local primary school and had to go further afield. So we looked at this issue in a lot more detail. I'm reporting it here with the board. Just a couple of points about it. We obviously to note that the school place planning is the responsibility of Kent County Council, but I would emphasise the amount of liaison that we have with them. We speak to them very regularly. We have done over the years about various aspects of school place planning. Some of that comes through the sort of statutory planning process, but actually goes much wider than that. We talk about more strategically across the piece. So I would emphasise that. The school place planning, it's not an exact science in the sense that even if we here, the demand for school places in any year changes quite considerably due to variable birth rates. So, as you see, our planning smooth out those variations in demands, and one of the ways they do that is by planning across a larger area than just the gardens. So across dark integration, and that's one of the ways of helping to smooth the variations that occur. I think it's really important at 611 to emphasise that overall KCC remain of the view that sufficient school places are being provided within the existing consented schemes, and particularly when other existing schools are factored in, as they inevitably do. So, as we said last time, we don't believe that there's an overall issue here with the amount of places, and they carefully monitor that, and we talk to them regularly about that. So the sense we have is that this is about smoothing out over periods of time, but also the issue that we touched on previously with the timing of school delivery, which means that siblings, children from outside the area can take those places in the early days, and then their siblings get priority in later years. So that still remains an issue. There's some information here about the allocation process, which is just finished for this intake, which will be in September. The numbers that are in the paper relate to primary places. That does indicate that there were 128 first preferences stated for Cherry Orchard and Ipswich Green schools, and of those 102 are from residents of Castle Hill or Ipswich Green neighbourhoods. KCC, will they tell me open up the second form with Greens, which would mean you have 120 places available. So on the face of it, there should be 120 places available in Absolute Green and Cherry Orchard, and 102 residential Castle Hill residents. So there should be enough capacity there for everybody locally to be allocated. I don't know. People will have had their letters, I think, literally in the last couple of days, I think 1st of March yesterday. So, but obviously, if that is not the case, then we'll probably no doubt find out pretty soon if there are any people that will agree with the score that have been appointed. But as it says, that does mean that there are potentially a number of places that will be filled by people from further afield, which takes you back to, you might then get siblings in future years that get higher priority. I think finally on this, it's just to, Simon raised this with the previous housing minister at our last meeting, and we should raise it with the new minister when we get that opportunity. I think the question for the board is, are the board content with the outcome of the paper, or the summary? Is there any other further action that the board feel we should be taking beyond that at this moment in time? So the intention, I think, would be to raise the issue as we did with the minister. There may then be, with their support, some approach to DFE around, as was previously suggested. But let's just see whether there's any questions on that, and whether the board were content with that as an action, or they felt we should be doing anything beyond that.
Board. Neil, can I bring you in?
Thank you, Simon. I found the information useful, particularly on the numbers, but I then stepped back and said, what's our role and why are we getting involved in this? And it seems to me that we have a legitimate concern because we're seeking to encourage building community and also sustainable communities. So it makes sense for those who live in the Garden City, and that's the children who live in the Garden City, to go to school here. So that's entirely desirable. But then I'm just slightly concerned that we raise expectations too much for people, because it's a county council responsibility. The school set the emissions policies. We're writing to the housing minister, not the education department. And I'm really querying what we're seeking to achieve. Are we seeking to influence, or are we seeking to do something more? And it seems to me that the most that we can seek to achieve is to influence in order to achieve the community building aims. But so I'd like a little bit of clarity on what outcome are we expecting?
Shall I come back? I think that's a very fair question. I think in my view, the inability for local families who moved into the area to get their children to good or outstanding schools which are in close proximity to the houses they bought, if they are unable to do that, it has the potential to adversely affect people's perception of the Garden City. So I think that's when it becomes our issue, because inevitably I think the nature of the press commentary which we've seen before, which will be negative about the Garden City because people cannot get their children to local schools. I've set up 3 schools. Ian, you've been chair governors, I've been chair governors, primary and secondary schools. The way that one can deal with this without getting involved in conversations with sort of ministers in various departments is if the admission authority, the schools themselves, look to consult on and change their admission priority arrangements. If they create a priority for children over and above sibling priority for a geographical area, which is equivalent to that of the Garden City, but we're not perfect either, because now we've got holes in that anyway of existing communities. So that is a way that I have dealt with it for a secondary preschool I set up by having a parish boundary, which was a priority admissions area over and above sibling violence. You know, as an example, you may have children that have got high priority preference with special educational needs, who would be coming to schools from quite a long distance, but then all their siblings can come in as well. So it stops the ability for local children to get to school. But that's not our decision. We could write to the local schools and say, you might want to consider this so local families can get there, but you know, Kent County Council would have a view on that. So, you know, it is, we don't have the levers to achieve anything. All we can do is point out to people where the levers are, should they choose to pull them. That helps.
So we're trying to influence, but and the outcome we're trying to achieve is that people who live here, children who live here, can go to school here.
Yes. Now, if you come back in, of course, if you change your admission priority, you have to consult on that. So there is a time lag in that. If you do that, you know, there will be other parents who are upset because they've got their children in, and then they can't get their siblings in, and they're from further afield. But if our, you know, I think the question of the board, which you rightly, you know, have elevated in this conversation, is this a matter for us? And should we look to try and influence outcomes here? Should we wish to pull levers?
It was twofold really, is what are we aiming to do and what outcome are we expecting? And I think we need to be slightly clearer about the outcome.
Well, I think the outcome would be that children who live closer to the schools moving to the Garden City would have admission priority over children who come from further afield. That is actually a matter ultimately for the local schools, their board of trustees and their admissions arrangement, should they look to try and modify them.
Perhaps in discussions that we're having with the Minister, with Kent County Council and the schools, we should be clearer, saying that we would like to see an admissions policy which gives a priority to those living in the Garden City, schools in the Garden City, and that we're seeking to do that in order to achieve build community, but also as a contribution to sustainability objectives as well.
Absolutely. So if you look at 6.22 here, now we can see that of the, I'm not sure which year this is, 18 children from further afield will be allocated to place this year. Okay, so that's 2022 access, is it?
Yes, in September.
Okay, so we can see that that is directly, as we build out in Garden City, going to cause problems in the future, because a lot of children have siblings. So we know we're trying to, even there will be future issues, we're just trying to minimise it moving forward. So if you were to change your admissions priority, maybe for those 18 children, if they've got a sibling which is coming 2-3 years down the track, actually by the time parents try to get them into their sibling school locally, actually the schools have changed their administration. It will be children from parents who've moved into the vicinity of the Garden City who get in preference to their siblings. So for our various sustainability and other criteria. I'm not sure a dialogue with the Housing Minister going into the sector state for education is going to be a productive use of the government's time. I think it's, should we choose to do something, I think it would be for us to communicate to the boards of governors of the local schools that, you know, this is what we see, this is, we would like local parents to get local children into the schools, but we, you know, understand that as a matter of their admission arrangements, and, you know, perhaps they would like to consider that because that is our aspiration, we recognise it's their decision.
That seems to me to be the appropriate course of action, because I don't think the Housing Minister is going to be able to help us much with this.
It's certainly not going to be the most important thing for him to be dealing with. Yeah.
I think this suggestion, sorry, John, that Jeremy made last time was that this is likely to be a situation in large-scale growth areas across the country. So the suggestion I think came from that perhaps the government might want to consider a broader changing approach to alleviate that problem. It's not a problem just about the city. Probably a problem elsewhere, but that was how it came about, I think you remember from previously. Sorry, John.
I think the problem we've got is you won't just simply solve it by changing the admission criteria, because that's they're academies and they can therefore do what they like pretty much. I think the issue, I know I have annual meetings with the education team from Kent, and we talk about where the demand's coming in age profile are coming through, where the schools need to be, that they lag behind the need. They almost want it to be proven the kids are rocking up needing a school and there's no school to go to, then they'll build an extension if they get the money, or a new school if they can get the money. I think perhaps the conversation we need to be having is working with them to work through those projections for the city area, current city area, if we call it that, to understand what they think we're going to be doing versus our timeline of development, to make sure we're building at the need time or ahead of time, and not when it's proven we need it, which is the way Kent's doing it. I'm not faulting Kent because it's basically a funding issue for them. They will fund it when there's a proven need for it. What we're trying to say is we're trying to give priority to local kids getting to local schools. That local school needs to be there, because what's happening is the local kids are they're looking for any school possible to put their children into. And if you look at the numbers that just been issued by Kent, most parents have got their first choice, but not all. Because some haven't even got their fourth choice. And when you're going down to lower than fourth choice in school, you're really scratching around for a school to put your child into. And some of the parents I know, they've got their children miles apart in different schools because that's all they could do.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense. So I think we need to engage with them and get the need proven, and then say to them, okay, you're the education authority, but we sense and we agree with you, you need it quicker, therefore we will build it in advance of the need. And have, so for one form entry set up, then very quickly you go to 2 or 3, but just get it moving.
Yeah.
And that would offset some of the demand line.
Yeah, come on, Nick, then I'll.
So my question is what the prognosis is in the context of this is going to get worse, because it's not an existential issue, but it is a big issue about the city's branding, because it is a garden city, and predominantly people are moving here because of the location. This is not an extension to cope with urban growth. This is a new place, and so it is absolutely fundamental. Now, in the context of what's coming through the pipeline through Section 106, I suspect that's slow. I'm looking at Mark. But is this something we need to be thinking about materially solving in the context of Exit Central and working on how we can allocate SIL in this direction?
So fundamentally, I don't, as the paper says, we and KCC do not believe there is an issue about overall numbers. The planning consents that are there, and it will be an issue, and we're already in discussion with KCC about what's the school provision in Ipswich Central, for example. That's likely to trigger another requirement. So don't think it's about the overall numbers, but it is, we believe, about the timing of the delivery. Now, interestingly, I think that the schools are generally being provided reasonably well ahead of the overall need. So if you take Cherry Orchard, for example, that opened up when there were a few hundred houses here. Now, but that actually gives rise to the problem, because if somebody, so there's immediately 60 places available in the intake. If there are only 30 of them going to be taken from Castle Hill, they cannot turn down a child from some distance away that wants to come to a brand new school. So they take them, and then it's the sibling of that child that's got in very early that then gets priority later on. So the timing of the deliveries, I mean, ideally you want them to be delivered at exactly the time demand meets supply. If you go too late, then everybody living here says, well, there's no schools, which is the problem John's has. If you go too early, then you get the sibling issue. So it's a really difficult thing to balance, but I don't think there's an issue of overall numbers of places. That's what places that are telling us.
Okay, so yeah, look, absolutely. No, I've been a leader of a unitary local authority, so I spent a lot of time dealing with school place allocations. It's almost nothing as important to a resident as getting your child into the best possible school and the siblings into the same school. So I think what I suggest is that to draw on Neil's point, and I'm sure we can do this through our KPIs. You know, we identify why we think it's our business. Yeah. So we're clear, so people go, yeah, okay, actually, it's very interestingly written to you, but why do you think it's your business? So we should reference it into our KPIs. And then, you know, I think we should write to the 2 local primary schools, share governors, heads, and say, I'm happy to do that in my name. And we should say to them, look, you know, we know it is an issue. It's not a system capacity issue. It's, you know, in accordance with our KPIs, it's local children getting into local schools. You know, and I don't know if there is a area, an identifiable area that would create a priority area in the admission policy. But frankly, that is one potential solution. But frankly, we recognise and respect that it's up to them. They deal with their own admissions requirements, and we leave it like that, and we copy that into the local authority leaders and also the big member for Children's Services in Kent Town Council, the leader, and so and we've done as much as we can do basically. If people think that's sensible,
yeah, we'll get some message.
Yeah, you know, I think certainly we have KPIs. We want to achieve those KPIs. We don't have the power to do anything here, but we can certainly indicate how people might help to make things better. Otherwise, perhaps before we move on to, I'm assuming everyone's happy with that? Yeah.
Just one thing.
Yes.
Sell EDC central building goes to education in part.
Complicated response to that. I don't know.
We can take
it's not a straightforward answer.
Right. Perhaps to touch on another couple of points. Board member recruitment. I have been involved in a very, very strong field of people who came forward. Been through a pre-sift and then a sift process, and I think those who have been called to interview, a very strong and diverse group of individuals, have been notified that they are being called to interview, so we're just scheduling those at the moment for hopefully the interview dates during the course of March. I'm very encouraged by the strength of the applicants, and we'll also achieve some much needed diversity on the board. So that's great. I think you just touched on your health and safety. If someone gets pinged or if someone tests positive for COVID, general view that people won't be expected to come into work, exercise their own discretion, but there's no expectation that they come to work.
We're going to try and discourage them from coming in.
Yeah. I got back from Portugal. I was pinged yesterday. I took a test this morning. I was negative. When I was positive, I wouldn't come to this board meeting. I would have been online like Daniel. But I think it seems like a good approach, really. People have differing degrees of risk tolerance to these things. We need to be sensitive to those different risk tolerances that people have. All right. Any other comments on this paper? Thank you for that. That's duly noted. No decisions there. Then we come on to Kevin, Head Street Living.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just pull out a few highlights from the paper. Firstly, to say the MC Garden City Community Board met on the 15th of February, and a very good, successful meeting was chaired by Councillor Kite. Most of the focus of the meeting was thinking about how the Garden City residents would like to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee and coming up with ideas from that. There was a very strong focus around lots of very local street parties where residents were going to try and develop those themselves. And EDC agreed to kind of support them as much as we can, and perhaps so we would work with our developer partners to kind of dress the Garden City appropriately to try and foster some spirit for the Jubilee event. So that's the approach that we're going to take on that, and also to consider if there's some sort of longer lasting things we can do, perhaps naming spaces or streets or something that's part of that as well, sort of a legacy coming from that. In terms of some of the highlights of activity over the last month, in particular was the Magical Winter Garden, which was held at Springhead Pen Park at the end of January, and despite a very cold winter evening, more than 1,000 residents attended that, which actually is probably the most attended event we've had on one of the most coldest evenings of the year, so that was quite an achievement. And that was delivered in partnership with Cohesion Plus, who are a local arts organisation, so a real thanks to them for working with us and really leading that project, which was very successful. I've included in the paper some feedback from local residents, which was amongst the best we've had to date. A short film of that event was on YouTube and has had over 31,000 views. So again, it really shows the value of events and activity and really kind of opening up the attractiveness of living in the Garden City. And again, we're glad that event was held in Springhead. It was one of the first events we've had in that part of the Garden City, so we're really trying to balance events in different neighbourhoods, which is great. And actually, the second event we had in Springhead was also this month as well. So we had a Japan festival, again delivered by a local arts organisation called Blueprint, celebrating everything Japanese, from food, culture, art, and tea ceremonies, etc. And every ticket for that was sold out in advance. So again, it really shows the interest people have in getting involved in events being delivered. So thanks to Blueprint and Eastgate for that. In terms of residents' own activity on the ground, a real surge in people getting back out again. The Sunday Active group has had its 4th birthday, and the Couch to 5K group, which comes from that, has had to open a second group because so many people are keen to get fit in the new year. So we now have 2 Couch to 5K groups working, which is great. I guess looking forward, the biggest thing for us coming up is our Greening the City events. We're going to have the first of those on Friday, followed by 4 different events in each neighbourhood of the Garden City. I reported last month that this will give every resident in the Garden City a free tree. We're branding it very much as part of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee as the Queen's Canopy, where every resident will be able to get involved in that. But at each of these events, it's not just giving them a free tree. We're going to have lots of local bakeries sharing recipes and food that they've baked using the fruit trees that we're going to be distributing. We'll be having local wildlife groups telling people about the advantages of biodiversity, and also there'll be people on hand to help people understand how they can grow, how they can plant and grow their trees. Great to say as well that we've had loads of volunteers from local residents, from local businesses, and our own staff who've all volunteered to get involved in these events and help people carry their trees, plant their trees, and other things. So I'm really excited about this series of events that's going to take over the next month, which is part of the planting season. And that's the main highlights of the month.
Kieran, thank you as always. Lots going on. So forward, do we have any questions or observations on this paper?
My only observation is that it seems excellent.
Yes, as always.
And I'm interested that you're achieving this on not much of a budget. But I'm interested in how, for instance, the Japanese Angels Winter Garden event, how much was this, did we allocate to assist?
Yeah, so for both of those, the Winter Garden and the Japanese event, we went 50-50 in partnership funding with that. So the 2 arts organisations fund funding from other places, and then we match fund those. The Magical Winter Garden, for example, was £5,000 of our money, but to attract over 1,000 people in that scale of event was incredibly good value for money, in our opinion. So yeah, we've been really lucky to be able to get good arts organisations working locally. Over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, our cultural programme has attracted almost £1 million in funding through Cultural Development Fund and other ways. So from EDC's modest kind of investment in this area, we've managed to attract a lot of additional funding, which allows us to do these things. In terms of the tree giveaway, we've also had funding from that from externally. So again, EDC is sort of funding the actual events and activities, but a lot of the activity is volunteers doing it on the day, and the trees we've had external funding for as well.
Good. The Diamond Jubilee is going to be lots of street parties going on. You're going to give some thought for how we can permanently memorialise Diamond Jubilee. Platinum, sorry,
Yeah.
apologies. Time flies. An oak somewhere, you know, a bit of public art. You know, I don't know if you've got any thoughts there.
Yeah, so we did ask the community board what they'd like to see there, and as I say, the focus very much was on a smaller scale, but we did think they would like to see something as a legacy.
Mm.
So we know this year, for example, there were a number of green spaces, allotment gardens, other things going to be completed. So we'd like to work with the Garden City Trust, perhaps, to sort of think, perhaps, do we name those as a memorial garden or other things? So again, there was a desire for that, to have some plaques, some memorials, but the focus was definitely much on the activities of the day. But we sort of sent community boards members off to kind of think about that longer lasting one, and there's something else they'd like to think about. I think people were thinking very much on the day and activity, but actually we sort of sent them off to think if there's anything else you'd like to think about longer term. We're really open to suggestions and want to work with them on it.
All right, so is this something that we can ask the Garden City Trust to consider?
We'd like to work with the Garden City Trust and sort of see if we can do something.
All right. Daniel, as chair of the Garden City Trust, we were wondering whether you and your august committee of trustees could give some thought to how we might, have some permanent memorialisation of the Platinum Jubilee.
Well, I don't want to sound unenthusiastic about that suggestion, but I think it's worth remembering Garden City Trust doesn't have any money, and is there really to receive bits of the Garden City that have been developed by the corporation. So I don't think that the Garden City Trust is at this stage in its development, and it's only had one board meeting, is the right vehicle for initiating a new piece of sculpture or whatever it might be, whatever the memorial might be, if it's of a permanent character, and it would cost money. If it's not of a permanent character, then it's not appropriate for the Garden City Trust to be doing it anyway. That's something very much, I think, for Kevin. So before I sort of accept that, I would just like the officers perhaps to think if that's quite the most appropriate way of taking this forward.
Yeah, just to alleviate your concerns, what we were looking at really was, is there anything coming forward this year that we're aware of that might be suitable for naming? So there is garden spaces which are funded by ourselves or developers that may well move to the Garden City Trust in the future. We didn't want to just name them without the Garden City Trust being involved, but they are. So it wouldn't be a requirement of the Garden City Trust to fund them. We've got funding for them, but we didn't want to assume we would want to name them without your input. So we'd like to work with you to make sure.
I think that's a rather different point, as I understood it, and I entirely agree with that. In fact, it's going to become a slightly bigger element of thinking, I hope, in the future, because although the corporation itself will wind up, the long tail of the infrastructure or anything we build will become the responsibility of the Garden City Trust, and it will need to be involved, I think, as things develop, so as to be able to express a view on the sustainability of things that it might be inheriting in the future. Similarly, I think it needs to become a regular consultee on planning applications that relate to things that might be left behind after the corporation winds up and that need to be looked after. So I certainly think we should be involved in the way that Kevin describes, in anything that might be regarded as permanent. Now, if it was a naming event, of course, that's another matter. If we were to commemorate the Jubilee by naming a garden or something that would otherwise exist in honour of the Queen and her long reign, that, of course, would be another matter altogether, because there's very little consequence of that in terms of finance and commitment.
All right, I'm going to try and draw this to a conclusion, but have a conclusion. Do we break ground on any of the Alcadon Community Hub, Castle Hill Community Building and Northley Riverside Community Buildings during Jubilee year? No? Okay, but we could make a decision, acting with the 106 contributor, that one of those would be named to commemorate the Jubilee. Yes?
I think we could.
It's agreed by Jubilee.
Yeah.
Can we have a look at a significant building? Let's not go and have, just some allotments, yeah? We can have a look into that.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
obviously, as Mark suggested, obviously neighbourhood house is associated with a beautiful garden space as well, so that would right in front of the school, so that would be a really befitting one if we could.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, so let's look at that, and you come back with some thoughts on that in due course, and I'm sure that will be embraced by the Garden City Trust because it won't cost them anything. All right, good, great work there, Kevin. Thank you very much. I think that report is for noting, so it is duly noted. Communications report. Mark is not with us. Who is taking this?
Well, I'll happy to try to answer any questions, but I might need, if you do have any questions, I might need colleagues to help me. But yeah.
Right, that's brief and to the point. Thank you. Excellent communication there. So I think we've all read it. Another excellent month's work spreading the word. Does anyone have any comments on that? Right. Okay. Good. That's duly noted.
Yeah.
Well done, Ian. Well done. Planning and housing report. Mark, you won't get off as likely.
No. But thank you. Thank you, Simon. So the usual update report from me. Planning committee met since the last board meeting. We had a really good session. We had that sort of a hybrid meeting. But yeah, as is identified in the paper, the Go Away scheme for 182 homes. A lot of work went into that. With officers and including the design team. Generally the committee were pleased. It was a good discussion, but well received. The forward plan listed out and I mentioned in 2.3. We aren't now expecting a presentation on Ashton in phase 3. So Ashton is coming forward as a joint venture with Cumberland and Clarion. A few revisions on that phase, but we're hoping to have other Cable Wharf School presentation in this month, other follow discussions are going on in relation to Alcadon South. In terms of a little bit of an update, I suppose, in terms of the specific sites and what's sort of generally focusing the work at the moment. A lot of discussions around the market centre in Alcadon. So the first phase of that we have been expecting it for a while, but that will consist of a food store, some open spaces, some residential units. So we've been having a lot of discussions with Dartford Council around the affordable housing mix and distribution amongst sort of 4 parcels across the market centre. So a lot of work's been going on there. Generally on Speed Green, there's quite a lot of live applications. We've obviously got a couple of the community buildings, as we've just spoken about, are with us, but we are waiting on Redrow for those. Last Thursday, we issued the scoping opinion for Speed Central, so that was a good step forward in terms of that work. So that's gone back to colleagues and Julia's team. And in terms of the next few weeks, we're expecting the Cable Wharf Reserve Matters. So the Cable Wharf School planning to be open in 2024. It's a relocation of the existing Rocheville School and then an expansion of that. So that application and also the conversion of the Henley building, which is obviously an important sort of local building in the conservation area. Art Deco building, which generates a lot of interest from the community. Those both have to be on the 18th of March, so we're expecting those in. I've provided a relatively long update in terms of the resort. An awful lot's been happening. It's all quite complicated and involved. I won't necessarily go through all of the content, but just a bit of an update in terms of what's happening on that since the paper was done. We have now received an email from Savills, who are the planning agents acting on behalf of the of LRCH, wanting to discuss stable common ground. So our planning consultants, Quad, we're going to be liaising with them either yesterday or today. We are doing our prep for our pre-meeting which would happen on the 29th of March. I am in discussions with your officers as well, John and Gratian. Yeah, the next key deadline is the 15th of March, so there may be some additional information provided by the developers at that stage. And then the usual just update in terms of numbers, so we're 481 completions for the year. Bit of a jump in starts, but yeah, 481 out of the 525. We did have our Garden City developers meeting this month. There's generally been feedback consistently across multiple phases with multiple developers about material costs. Generally, people are coming back to the team around, amendments to materials, either because of cost or availability. So I know it's been bobbing around for quite a while. Originally, it didn't feel as though that was having much of an effect on the ground, but it feels as though it's having more of an issue. It's becoming more of an issue recently.
Could I just drill into that?
Yeah.
In what way people are looking for amendments for?
Generally, yes. Yes. So I know that Simon and Caroline have been in a meeting, possibly now, looking at the education hub in Alcadon. Generally amendments to the materials. To be honest, either because materials are getting more expensive and they're looking at the overall budget, or because of availability. For example, the education campus again, they're trying to target opening in 2024, and they're very aware of what's available now, which they will then need to use to get the ball going. So, but it is happening across multiple places.
Yes. Can I bring Neil in and then John?
Thank you, Simon. A number of points. One, I think we should be encouraged by the quality of the development put forward that we considered at the last committee meeting. So well done to officers on design, but we need to ensure that the quality is maintained throughout Garden City, and there's been a bit of variation. So that's an observation, but well done to officers. And a further observation is, if people are coming back and saying there's been a change to the price of materials, we've got to be very careful that we maintain the quality of the materials and that we don't, having approved something or given approval to reserve matters on the basis it's high quality on the materials, that the materials aren't then changed. So we've got to be careful about that. Those were observations. A question on completions. We had 43 completions in the last period, which seems low. We got up to 481. The target is 525, and I think we've got about a month and a half because those figures are to mid-February. Yes. So the question is, how confident are you we're going to hit the 525? I'm
confident that we'll meet it. I would like to be higher than 481 at this stage in the year, and I think in previous years we have possibly at this stage already met the annual targets. I know that we spent quite a lot of time working out the 525 number at the beginning of the year and working out if we could sort of to go above that. Some developers have done better than they were forecasting. Various ones have been low. I think that because we are waiting a little bit of data from Taylor Wimpey, which included the end of year, which we typically expect to come out of. Their end of year was December, so we still haven't got those numbers from then. I think we'll get to the 525, but I'm not expecting to go over by very much.
Yeah, because it was good on starts, 127, but low on completions. But
yes,
there should be a lot to come out of the table on the side, though.
Yeah, I think so.
So we're going to get there.
I think so.
Good.
Yes.
Good, but I do think we need to just keep an eye with increasing costs on quality. We can't blame us for quality.
Yeah, absolutely. We're building for decades of Garden City, so we understand the immediate squeeze on people, but frankly they also have deep pockets. Yeah, so some of the house builders results. So John,
two questions. I'll be parable to Milby actually, but the bear pit architectural feature thing, I call it a thing, so I can't work it out.
Okay.
When will that be finished so we can actually determine whether it does has a sensible representation of what it's meant to be representing, in case we need to supplement it with something else?
There is an interpretation board that will go with the public arts to make it very clear of what it is. I don't have an exact date for the implementation, but I can take that away. I think they have done some of the open space work now, but I'll have to take that away and take an exact date.
So I think I've got quite an imaginative mind, but the squiggles are squiggles really, metalwork and nothing else. It doesn't represent anything to me, and I don't think to many people either. The other issue is the kilns that have been exposed. What are we doing about them to preserve them? And if we do, how does that affect the development proposals?
Yeah, so I know that the officers have been working with KCC Heritage very closely. They have various meetings. I think they may have had another yesterday or today to go down there. There is a process embedded within the Outlet Commission that the Bellway are working to around if unexpected things are found, to be looking at those and sort of recording those, so the knowledge isn't forgotten about. I don't believe there is an idea around sort of exposing those and sort of changing the principles that were agreed at the outline stage. But I don't know that there was a recent meeting, so it was either yesterday or today, where they were going to go down and have a look at the information. I think they posted quite recently online, because I know that they are finding things relatively regularly. So again, I might have to take that away and come back to it in terms of whatever was agreed at the meeting. It was either yesterday or today.
There's quite a bit of momentum building up to preserve them. I'm just concerned if we do the same thing to them as we did with the bear pit, put it under 2 or 3 metres of protected material and then put columns through it, there will be some resistance. So we need to have a clear picture of what we're going to do, and that may then affect the development of the site. So just to say we're not worrying about it really isn't going to be an answer to anybody.
Yeah, it's definitely in the not worrying about it category. I think it's different to the bear pit in the sense that people knew that the bear pit was there. It was already very good in the application was looked at. There was an awful lot of advice at the time around whether it should be exposed, the pros and cons around that in terms of preserving it as a heritage asset. The things that are being found in North England in relation to the kilns are things that people didn't think there. So then there is a different sort of way to be looking at those. But it isn't as though I bet we are communicating. They are being very clear about what's being found. And as I say, our experts from KCC and from Historic England are going down into the looking at these. I think there have been a suggestion, possibly from some of the local community, about asking Historic England for listing, and obviously that's a different process to our processes. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely being definitely not being.
If it affects the schemes, then they'll come back in.
If the scheme has to change, then it would go back to, if the scheme required a different planning application, it would go back to planning committee. I can certainly provide an update, as I say, in terms of where the outcome was sort of yesterday or today. I would appreciate that.
Okay, I'm going to bring Neil in on this. I think he wants to discuss that. Clearly, that is important to the community, but also to our local as well.
And just on that point, the fact that the kilns, that wasn't appreciated that the kilns are there, doesn't make them any less important. In fact, it makes it more important that the schemes are looked at again, because if they didn't know they were there, they couldn't have taken them into account and they couldn't have designed the scheme for it. So I think we need to be careful about how we deal with that. I mean, they have a certain heritage significance, called in the jargon.
Yeah.
It's discovered.
Yeah.
It may be that because they didn't know about it, they designed it in such a way that didn't respect that significance, and changes might be necessary.
Yeah, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on kilns, but I'm told the ones that were found very recently were designed to be underground. So I'm not saying that obviously foundations and things should be affecting them, but I think as a structure, the kiln operated below ground. So I don't think we're in a world where by opening them up, it would then replicate how it would have been originally, but I do need to do some digging about what the discussions were there.
I think it may be the right word, or it may not be.
So, but generally, I'm sure when it goes before the planning committee, they have sensitive to the heritage assets, and the educational value and the sense of place, and as indeed you are. So make sure we're doing the appropriate work before you
goes forward. Nick?
So I can't remember what we agreed. Look for it, because I'm sure it's going to be there. There's just splits between 1, 2, 3s and 4s on starts and completions, so we can keep an eye on what type of community we're building. And splits between affordable rent and shared ownership. I can't remember whether we agreed we look at it every 6 months or.
Yeah, I think I provided, because interestingly, the committee, the committee had a really good discussion about affordable housing as well, and split around that in the last meeting. And I shared with them the papers that I gave this board, I think it was in October and December. So yeah, I mean, if I can do a 6-monthly update for you guys, that would be helpful, which would mean that I can probably start something back to May, June time.
And what levels of value are affordable rents and shared ownership at as a percentage of markets concerned? 50 and 75 because it'd be also good to know that there's lots of grafting power for go in the city.
Yeah, it's sometimes difficult to give one number because the values also vary so much across the whole of what are there as well. I will tell you.
Generally, grants are made available if it's a section 1/6 obligation, housing and
yes, some.
So it's only post.
Right.
But actually, what the point I was trying to think was how our ERPs are stable to times doing or are generally what's their capacity. Its capacity is